Okay, going to go through this little video I made. Stefan Molyneux' universally preferred behaviour, UPB as he calls it, as the foundation of his ethics and political science. It sounds to me not much more. I've been got into a few videos of Milton Friedman, looking for a particular quote of his. Anyhow, not found it as yet, but it's very similar free market radicalism, really, and falls through its and fails and falls through its simplistic reasoning. So let us begin.
But I'm going to make the case that ethics is exactly the same as the scientific method.
Well, he'll fail by his own standards, as I'll discuss.
Follows the same principles, has the same kind of justifications, has to be logical, has to be universal, has to be consistent, has to be reproducible, has to be predictive, and so on.
It's the predictive element that he fails on, I think. It'd be nice for him to outline exactly, it's not enough to actually make predictions. You have to show that it's not just correlation, it is actually causation, because in the realms you're dealing with, you're only getting statistical evidence.
Any valid ethical theory has to be logical and empirical. I'm going to try to make the case that ethics is not subjective. Ethics is perfectly logical. Ethics is empirical.
Well, I think it's not subjective, but I don't think it's empirical. But
when it comes to ethics, we do kind of have to define what they are. For me, defining them as like trying to understand right and wrong is kind of circular. It's kind of tautological. It doesn't really help that much. There definitely is, in the realm of morality, a core concept of preference.
It's kind of an empty statement. This is because when we talk about ethics, the ideas of preference will come up, but as an opposite to, in a sense, an opposite to ethics. Ethics is the scrutinizing of your behavior, regardless of your preference, right? And so this emphasis, because it's in his UPB acronym, universally preferred or preferential behavior, so on and so forth. It's the exact antonym of what's meant by ethics, that you're not regarding preference, that there is a definite ought in spite of what your preference is in certain situations.
Okay, scenario number one. I'm sitting there doing my taxes, and you're just standing around whistling while I'm trying to do my taxes, and after a while, I kind of get like a facial tic, and I'm kind of like, would you mind not whistling while I'm trying to do my taxes? It's really distracting. So that's an expression of a preference, but I don't think that there's many people who would say that it's evil for somebody to be whistling while I'm doing my taxes. Right? Like, I hire some painter to paint my study, I'm going to say, I'd like you to paint it rust blood red, because it'll look good on YouTube or something. I'm stating a preference, and if he doesn't paint, if he doesn't paint it the right color, I might sort of get mad at him. I might not pay him. I'm probably not going to say that the man is, stone evil.
So that's what we commonly understand by preferences. Fair enough.
And then there's like the have-to-haves, like don't kill, don't rape, don't steal.
But if they're moral statements, it's not merely a preference. Oh, I'd rather prefer it you don't kill me or kill my family. If they're a moral law, it's a completely different meaning whatsoever. And so this juxtapositions of types of preference, as with moral laws that Stefan provides, just emphasizes the difference between what a preference is and what a moral law is.
We're going to define morality as universally preferred human behavior.
Now, we can't stop him defining whatever he wants, and you know, I think even with his definitions, I think there's a certain amount of invalidity to his whole argument, separate from his definitions. But we have to pay close attention to the definitions and ask themselves, what do they really mean? Do they really mean what he's saying they mean, or do they really mean what they really mean, as you'll see?
Universally preferred human behavior. Universally preferred behavior does not mean that everybody prefers that behavior. But what it means is that if you claim the behavior is preferable and you claim that it's universal, then certain consequences are going to follow.
Right, so it's not entirely clear how, you know, what he's talking. Oh, that's it. It's the invocation. Before we talked about how preference has something to do with ethics. I prefer blood red walls. I prefer not to be murdered. What was the first example he gave? But now there's a distinct change in meaning between preference and that kind of preference and preferable, right? Because in this general sense, it's preferable means to an end. It's not a personal choice per se, a point of preference, but that the end is preferable, either by me or by everybody, and he's trying to inject an intrinsic purpose here. You can't have something be universally preferable unless the end is universally preferable. Also, at this point, really is all we're acknowledging in this preferability is that human beings make choices, and those choices are based upon preferences, and that subtle distinction, by not bringing it through, makes his theory look more complex in a way, and in those complexities allows him to make these meaning shifts.
Right, because if it's a mere opinion, you know, I think people should not eat those Hawaiian donuts with the multicolored sprinkles on top. It's just an opinion. It doesn't mean that anyone's really going to, oh, that's interesting, I'm going to go have the donut that I want. It doesn't mean...
Another example of preference, which will be, I think, inadequately juxtaposed to make his point.
...mean anything to anybody else. If you put forward a theory, though, that says people should behave in such and such a manner, then you...
So if you put this forward, it's nothing to do with preference, that they should be able to. Yeah, there's...
You are automatically accepting a whole bunch of things, and then you have a requirement, because you're trying to convince other people, you have a requirement for certain sets of logical principles and consistencies, which we'll kind of get into.
Well, I'd agree with him that when you do try to reason about ethics and say your ethics is non-subjective, that it must be logical and consistent, at least. I don't think empiricism has anything to do with it. but I think Stefan fails with his empiricism justifications as separately as he does with beginning his definitions, as though they have something to do with preference.
First thing that we need to figure out is, does preferred behavior is it even a valid concept?
So, yeah, that's a fair point. And in the beginning of his philosophy series, and when he hits the ethics procedures series, it's quite the fact that he wants to pose this question gives one heart, thinking he's really going to scrutinise his theory. But this level of scrutiny veers off after this apparent justification that people have preferred behaviours. And I'll just play that again. I mean, he's making this big issue that do people have preferred behaviours, and he makes this whole argument, imaginary argument, as though somebody could oppose it, to demonstrate quite rightly people have preferred behaviours, because the statement people have preferred behaviours is nothing more than the statement that people make choices. So in making a choice to debate him, in making a choice to even go against his opinion or with his opinion or whatever, yes, he's right in this argument that he argues that people have preferred behaviours. In their eating habits, they express preferred behaviours. They went to the counter and they chose these items and so on. So this is all rather banal and can lead nowhere in justifying an actual ethical theory, in the sense of what he's going to do is adapt that word that people have preferences into that some end actually has a universally ought preference, and that's a huge jump that he doesn't successfully make, logically make that. And when you change the meaning of a word, that's when you break your logical mandate, because one of the he cites at some point, I don't know whether I capture it in this video, but the law of non-contradiction, for example, and something can't simultaneously be something and simultaneously not be something. It can't simultaneously have the property of something and simultaneously not have the property of that thing. And, well, that's one of the logical universals. Well, the first logical universal is that we have the law of identity, and that when I instantiate A, in the next moment I say A, the A I'm talking about is the same A as before. A equals A. And this is the constraint that logic puts on us, that we can't conflate terms and slowly adapt the meaning of a word through our argument.
Does preferred behavior is it even a valid concept? Now, when I say exist, this of course is a rather tricky question. And what we mean by that, since we do want to always work empirically, in the way that we've talked about in the podcasts on metaphysics and so on, we always want to work empirically from reality and so on. So the real question around preferred behavior is, does it exist as a principle, does it exist as actions that can be described? Does preferred behavior exist as a manifestation in the real world? How could it conceivably be opposed, the proposition that preferred behavior exists?
Which, just a little interlude, is, I don't know how much of the argument I've got for it, but we're going to accept this, and we're going to give him leeway with the idea of looking for this evidence-based ethics.
How could it conceivably, that proposition, be opposed without using preferred behaviors? And if I say to you, preferred behavior exists, and you say to me, Steph, don't be crazy. Of course preferred behavior does not exist. In no way, shape, or form does preferred behavior exist. Okay.
I was looking, I've been looking for a video of Stefan's, I've not yet found it, where he does quite eloquently and talk about the self-detonating argument. I have a video, I forget the name of the guy, somebody else who talks about it, about cutting off the branch, that he calls it cutting off the branch that you're sat on, so to speak. But self-detonation, self-detonating arguments, I think there's another phrase for it which I can't quite remember. He has this good video where he explains how this principle, which is a good principle to use and listen for in debate. If somebody is arguing, is put forward using as part of the argument that they're trying to defeat the very argument, then it's self-detonating.
So what you're telling me is that you would prefer that I not believe that preferred behavior exists.
He wouldn't be saying that, but he would be making a preferential choice to engage with you. But
if you argue against preferred behavior, the existence and manifestation of preferred behavior, you are manifesting preferred behavior.
That's it. You're manifesting a choice.
No way to...
And so nobody would argue against it if you put it like that and said, do people make choices based on their preferences?
Escape the self-contradictory nature of that position. Even if you just stare at me, then you're still preferring not to answer.
You see the synonymity with the meaning here. Absolutely synonymous. What we're talking about here in preferred behavior is that humans make choices.
If you say to me, Steph, preferred behavior exists, and I say, no way does preferred behavior exist, then of course I'm choosing to jab my finger at you, I'm choosing to use English, I'm choosing to be emphatic.
And out of his own words, I say it here, out it comes there. I'm choosing. There is a bit, it's just struck me, there is a bit of an assumption here that what one chooses is what one prefers. You could be a bit of a dice man and say, you know, if it's odd, you know, I get to eat what I prefer, or if it's even, I'm going to choose what I don't prefer. Or some people might just think it be some kind of Buddhist high temple thing to always choose what they don't prefer. So that's an added complexity to the situation there, which doesn't affect my position in scrutinising his, but that complexity dimension isn't analysed by Steph.
I'm choosing to disagree with you. I'm preferring all of these things. Now, if preferred behavior exists, how are we going to understand it? How are we going to make sense of it?
Well, we make sense of it by recognising that all you've just said is human beings make choices, decisions, and we'll pretend the complexity isn't there, and we'll assume that it's usually based upon the preference.
How are we going to organize it in a way that is not subjective or whim-based or this or that or the other?
Well, the very fact that persons have preferences and make choices is exactly the very fact and definition of subjective. It's impossible to organise a person's preferences in an objective manner because that's what person's preferences means, is that they're subjective.
It's a very, very important question. If you accept the definition that morality is universally preferred behavior, i.e., it's put forward as the proposition that this is what everyone should do.
And the should is a complete antonym here to preference.
And so the question then becomes, does universally preferred behavior exist? Well, obviously there are some that are universally preferred, and it doesn't mean universally obeyed. It just means universally preferred, right?
And he has changed meaning here, and he's getting at the concept that whatever ethic gets said, we're not saying everybody will do it, yeah, but the ethic is the ethic. But it's far from obvious that there is this universal ethic, this universal art, because a preference is, by definition, something where you have a choice. So any action, and this is this issue has arisen with in Mendham, any action that you are impulsed by is not a matter of preference. It's a matter of biology and impulse. Actions driven by impulse, by definition, are not in the realm of choice and of a chance of being able to choose or express a preference.
In that most human beings will seek to avoid pain and pursue pleasure.
Exactly. But that they don't prefer it. That is an impulse, a biological impulse that controls that behaviour. Of course, they'll express the preference, but that isn't really what's at issue. If he's talking about actions and this scientific view of looking at the predictions, it's not as though you'll observe the actions of them choosing in this pain and pleasure behaviour. They only get to choose between two pleasures, or between something that's vaguely related, between sort of a pain, I don't really like that dish, or something.
We know that there are biologically ingrained, not just in human beings, but in all organisms, certain preferred behaviors.
Yeah, but in terms of categorizing and classifying and pinning words to what we're talking about here, those biologically ingrained, the words we choose for those are impulse driven, not preferences. It's just a poor choice of wording in the colloquial that people say, "Oh, I'd rather not be in pain and I'd rather not be sick." That's the impulse ensuring and making the preference map, yeah, together. But be sure, when you say it has a biological grounding, it has impulsive grounding, and that very same impulse that drives action drives mentality to say, I prefer not to, yeah?
Human beings have ingrained within our natures preferred behaviors, even if we just look at the basic pain and pleasure principle and so on.
Again, it's not preference if it's biologically programmed.
The next question.
A preference is something invoking the concept of free will, that you have the free will and capacity to choose, and that you're an individual, and that you can have a personal preference in this situation.
The question is, if preferred behavior exists, to what degree does preferred behavior exist?
Again, he's still going on, but absolutely preferred behavior exists.
I'm saying that there's a right and a wrong, that there's universally preferred behavior for mankind. The moment I start to use the word universal, then I'm kind of bound by the laws of logic and the scientific method, and observation and reproducibility, experimentation, and so on. It has.
He should clearly explain what this scientific method is in his mind, not just throwing out some buzzwords, because and with it being a social study, social science that we're talking about, the evidence we get is statistical, and there are various things we need to be cautious about whether what we're talking about is correlation or causation. And well, we'll get to the evidence section later, the back end of the video. Hopefully I probably won't play all that.
To be independent of time, it has to be independent of place, it has to be reproducible. I can't logically say, okay, Tom should not kill, but Jerry should kill.
This is a good point. You make some good points that, yeah, about universality, right? Is that sometimes when we discuss ethics, part of the purpose of ethics is to find a principle. And for it to be a principle means it has some broad application, yeah? It's some broad universality to it. Such that all things being equal, Jerry and Tom, the principle will apply to them. So this concept of universality is a valid one and noteworthy.
Because then what I'm doing is saying I have two opposing laws for human beings. In other words, I have contradictory principles applying to the same entities. I'm not deriving the consistency that is required from the objects that I'm describing. Let's take a look at something like people have property rights. People have property rights. Well, what is property right? The property right is the right to use and dispose of matter, fundamentally an object. So it could be an idea, I guess, but the ability, the moral legitimate right, the ability to use an object. Now, if I say...
That's right, yeah. You'll not catch that many times off these property rights advocates, insofar as that's exactly what he just said there, is the extent of the meaning of that. Because if you go back to the Lockean state of nature, say, and you try to put forward this idea of people having property rights, it's nothing more than the statement that people use things. Yeah, what he just said, and have the capability to use things. And while it's in their hand, they're using it, and this, yeah. And so it's going to, if that is the ultimate meaning of property rights, without a society, without a legal system, and arguing for a legal system and a society, because remember, without those things, the word property rights doesn't have any meaning as we conventionally understand it. The only meaning it could possibly have is that people use things, and you'd be asserting that is somehow profound, just like the fact that people make choices is profound. I'll just play that bit again.
Legitimate rights, the ability to use an object. Now, if I say that people don't have property rights, then...
Again, it's so simplistic, that nobody would object. If that's what you mean, that people can use things, who would object to that?
Anybody who uses matter in any way, shape, or form is acting in violation of that moral rule. You have exercised property rights in order to survive. You are exercising the property rights over your own body in order to communicate about property rights. Therefore, anybody who says property rights don't exist doesn't really make a whole lot.
See, but what property rights means is you use your body, you use the things you pick up and touch, yeah. So if you retain that meaning, and you retain the fact that he's made these rather, they're not complex, but given the superficiality, the banality of what is actually being said in meaning, to invoke these grandiose, and not terribly grandiose, but it's grandiose to argue so strongly as though it is even significant, that it's profound. Yeah, it's grandiose to go through these arguments when, if what it means to have preferential behaviour is the statement that people make choices. Yeah, the point is he's just trying to add credibility to the words universal, to the words preferred, preferential, and then by extension preferable, yeah, and the word, you know, in this property right business, he's rather jumped in at the deep end. He kind of apologises for that, but tries to say, well, let's just forget about all that. Here's where the rigor's breaking down. He just starts off with the number one libertarian mantra that humans have property rights. But when you look at what that means, it just means people are people, and what they touch, they use, and they use themselves.
Again. Now, if you put forward a proposition that says, thou shalt steal, thou shalt steal, that stealing is a morally good thing. Thou shalt steal. Well, what that means, of course, is that people who are not currently in the act of stealing something are immoral. But if you say...
Yeah, this is, again, it's more simple analysis about the implications and the need for consistency in an ethical statement. Which it seems to be going nowhere, to be honest. It's the relation between this property rights and these obvious, it's rather Kantian. One of the Kantian rules or tests for the possibility of an ethic is whether it's universalizable. Yeah, if it's in principle not universalizable, then it's clearly not an ethic. And this is what Stefan's kind of pointing to. You clearly couldn't have such a rule, you know. So I mean, this is 8 minutes 21 in on my video, but this is video, like probably 3 videos into his ethics series.
Thou shalt not steal, then the only people who are actually immoral are those currently in the act of stealing from something. If you're going to put forward a proposition that says thou shalt steal, and so obviously that leads you to some very ridiculous things. People.
It's like selling. When you say all these fundamentally obvious things, and it's like the yes. You get the seller house, the customer, to say yes, and you say, you're interested in a good deal, aren't you? Yes, and you pile up the yeses, yeah, and then, you know, it's always be selling and all that business, and then at the end you go, right, so you know it's a deal, it's what you want, what we're waiting for, let's go sign you up, let's get you for this thing, yeah. And it's like this in selling a philosophy or selling a cult and what's on. It is blinding you with yeses and trivials. Yeah, this guy talks sense, but he's doing it in a convoluted technical, educated fashion.
People who are asleep are evil. The problem with thou shalt steal, of course, is that it is both a simultaneous an affirmation and a denial of property rights. The main sort of thing that I want to get across here is that when you put forward a proposition about universally preferred behavior, you can't just randomly slice human beings up into, oh well, these are the politicians, or these are the soldiers, or these are the cops, or right? If there are moral rules, and there are moral rules consistently for everyone, universally preferred behavior seems to be pretty consistent across humankind.
Duh. Boom. He's just asserted it. He's not shown that. He's made three or four independent points which by themselves are totally agreeable, and then he just said, so the universally preferable behaviour exists, right? But he hasn't shown that at all. He's give us well, he's give nothing to back up that assertion. He said people make choices. He said people can use their bodies and use things. Big deal. There are biological impulses. It's illogical to say we have an ethical rule for, you know, Tom, and all things being equal, a different ethical rule for Jerry. Yeah, okay. He's give the example of stealing. You can't universalize it. Yeah, as it breaks the universal command that we have to apply equally, and it leads to absurdities as well. You know, that people who aren't exactly in the stealing right now are morally guilty. But he just said it, just straight out with it there. 9 minutes of talking, and then concludes,
universally preferred behavior seems to be pretty consistent across humankind.
No. He's not said that. The only thing he's hinted at about being universally common is about impulses, biological impulses. And I agree those are common to us all. But the very fact that it's an impulses are testimony to testify that we prefer not to be tortured. Yeah, just as we would drag our asses out of a pit of torture if we had chance. Yeah, we'll put our hand up and say, I'd rather not be tortured. Yeah, the same mechanisms. It's not really a choice. Yeah, and so it's nothing to do with ethics, and you can't get an alt out of it.
The need for logic, the possibility of objectivity and rationality within the science of universally preferred behavior that we call ethics. The fact that people disagree, the fact that there are gray areas, lots of contention, and so on, all it means is that people aren't being rational.
I do like that statement, actually, because being an objective moralist myself, when that's what I say, is that all these ambiguities and vagaries are just expressions of people not being logical and being prejudiced.
Then we can look at the question of, is there generally better universally preferred behavior? In other words, is there behavior that people should choose over other forms of behavior?
Better to what end? Better by what metric? Better by what measurement?
And what we can do in those circumstances.
How do you extract out of any valuation scheme the particularly in the realm of preference, the arbitrariness of the single individual or the group of individuals choosing what ought to be the values. How do you extract that arbitrariness will be a problem.
This we'll start to get into now. And I'm going to lean rather heavily on the analogy of nutrition, or to some degree medicine, to sort of help make the case for a universal system of ethics. And we will also run a few common ethical questions through our ethics machine, so to speak, and see if we can't come up with some rational ideas or rational things that sort of make sense at a gut level.
Right, so one thing that I object to Michael Sandel's lectures on is the invocation of intuition. Like the job of ethics is to explain our intuition, to explain, as he puts it, our moral experience. And now Stefan talks about, our gut reactions to this. Yeah, if it's born of logic, we've no need to worry about what the gut has to say to it. If the gut goes against it, that's not going to mean anything for us. The fact that he's going to use examples like nutrition and medicine, where the object, the ends, the purpose, are explicit, but the fact that those particular ends, moral ends, aren't explicit like that, and thus there is no definite metric like there is in medicine, where you can do the double-blind test and so on, to obtain an objective measure of whether to that end the medicine was better or not.
Let's have a look at this question of, are there behaviors that should be universally preferred by people or not?
There are some people who believe, that illness is God mandated and that you shouldn't take medicine. Yeah. So this is another example of why I'm falling this way now. I used to puzzle 20 years ago and more why people used to say, you die when you die. I'm smoking and eating fat and this, that and the other, and don't worry about it. Yeah. And given this game that we're trapped in is a bit shitty, the idea that you take medicine and then it's universally preferable for you to take medicine and to get better is far from clear cut. There's definitely a lot to be understood now that I understand. Why there's a Smith song saying, I'm smoking because I'm hoping for an early death. Yeah. You have to agree on the purpose, is the point.
When you find a logical inconsistency, a self-contradiction, a premise which contradicts another premise, an axiom that is not universally valid, the moment you come across that, you can stop. So if we're going to talk about universally preferred behavior in any way, shape, or form, then either it exists or it doesn't. So let's...
Which we've shown that he hasn't shown that it exists. He's talked about the words and the meaning, but in the sense what he means are universally preferred as an art, it's just not been evidenced.
Take a look at the premise that universally preferred behavior does not exist. There's no such thing as universally preferred behavior. We can generally say that if an organism has a goal called survival, that...
You see the goal-driven, the ends-driven, the purpose-driven nature of this argument. And he started with this: if organism has the purpose of survival, right? Well, that's a biological thing, not a choice thing. So the words and the meanings are all starting to get all mushed up here.
Eating and drinking and sleeping would probably be pretty high on that list, right? You can't put...
So they'd be preferable to that end, as in you can't say you have that end and not eat and drink. You can't say I'm going to live but not eat and drink. But it's like, again, it's a biological preference, really.
Forward a truth value statement that says universally preferred behavior does not exist. It's exactly the same as we talked about before.
No, it's not. No, it's not, because the meaning's changed. Yeah, you want to say this is just a universal compulsion, a universal compulsion to live. Yeah, people don't wake up and go, oh, I prefer not to live today. Yeah, it's.
When we talk about, I'm going to use your hearing to convince you that the senses are invalid. I mean, that's a complete logical contradiction. We actually we can stop right there and dismiss it. We can go on a little further if we like. But basically, if I say that universally preferred behavior does not exist, then I'm putting forward the proposition that it is universally preferable that people believe that universally preferred behavior does not exist.
No. You're not doing that at all. In the one sense, you have universally preferable behaviour as an art, mandated from logic, and then on the other sense you have this universally preferred behaviour as mandated from biology, and then you have this universally preferable behaviour idea of something to do with choice, which is neither compatible with biological impulses or logical arts. Oh, I meant to say earlier. So the problem is with purpose-driven things is you have to demonstrate a non-arbitrary way, you have to demonstrate a logical way of demanding that the end is correct and morally correct. There's nothing morally correct about having the purpose of living. It's just not relevant. It's not a moral question.
It's a complete self-contradiction. If universally preferred behavior does not exist, then everybody should be able to do whatever it is that they want to do. Universally preferred behavior does not exist, so everybody can do whatever they want to do. Well, that's fine.
Exactly. It is universal. Whether it's true or not, I mean, in actual fact, the idea that people can choose is consistent with that. People get to choose. The idea of whether you can be moral and choose whichever way you want is a entirely different question.
Now let's suppose that we accept that as a premise. What happens then if I wish to become the dictator of the world? What happens when one person's preferred behavior interferes with another person's preferred behavior? So let's say that you prefer to be free and I prefer that you be my slave.
But this isn't a matter of preference. This argument fails because there isn't the statement put forward that you get your preferences. There isn't a moral entitlement to your preference. I can prefer not to be a slave. Doesn't mean in this nihilist world without morality point of view, it just sucks to be me. I don't get my preference fulfilled. There's no moral right in this, and nothing logically been demonstrated illogical with the idea that I don't get my preferences met. If I put it forward that it's universally preferable that everybody gets their preferences met, then that would fail his own logical, and mine for that matter, need for consistency. He's going to try and portray this idea that by the invocation of him being this great dictator enslaving you, that is the fact that he's not had his preference met is indicator to the inconsistency. But it's not, because the opposite is also inconsistent. Nobody can get all the preferences met.
Right, so we have contradictory preferred behavior here. What are you...
No. One person is getting his preference met, the other isn't. That's all. His preferred behaviour still exists insofar as what that meant. He has a preference, yeah, and arguably, universally, yeah, we'd all prefer not to be slaves.
What are you going to do as a moral philosopher to resolve this problem? Because if everybody just wants to go live in the woods and do their thing, independently of everyone else, then you have a fairly decent, I think, argument, or at least consistent argument with the proposition that universally preferred behavior doesn't exist. If there's no such thing as universally preferred behavior, then for one person to impose preferred behavior on another is wrong.
No, he's not argued for that. Remember? Well, firstly, he hasn't shown universally preferred behaviour exists, but this imposition of my universally preferred behaviour has never been spoken about meeting your preferences. He's not shown that it's an issue at all.
Because there's no such thing as universally preferred behavior. And so you have a problem, a logical contradiction, even if we accept the base premise that universally preferred behavior does not exist. We then end up with the contradiction that if universally preferred behavior does not exist, it is universally preferable that human beings not impose their values on others, because that would be a violation of the subjectivity of preferred behavior. The question is only, what...
So he's invoked the subjectivity, but his basis is not subjectivity, this biological impulse.
Can be considered universally preferred behavior. Now we have a sort of twofold task, and we'll obviously divide this into two podcasts. The first fold task is, let's put forward some propositions and see if they conform to universally preferred behavior. And secondly, let's say that we come up with a set of universally preferred behaviors. Then what we need to do is we need to compare our theory against testable reality to find out if the theory holds true. Let's put forward a proposition that says murder is wrong. So if I say that murder is wrong, can I universalize it? Yeah, thou shalt not steal is universal, right? We can universalize that very easily. Because if you say, whatever morality you come up with, right? If you say theft is good because you should take whatever you want, because you should satisfy your own desires, right? Theft is good because if I see something in a shop window that I want, I should just grab it, I should satisfy my desires, I should act to maximize my pleasure. That would be sort of the principle behind it, or sort of one possible principle behind it. Well, I can certainly make that case, but the problem that I'm going to have in terms of universality is it's going to be rather tricky for me to say that all human beings should satisfy the desires that give them the most pleasure, should maximize their pleasure, and so on, and therefore that justifies stealing or rape or murder or whatever, because of course it's not universal. If I see something in a shop window and I want to maximize my pleasure, and maximizing my pleasure is the greatest goal, then the problem that I'm going to face in justifying that is that by stealing, I am maximizing my pleasure, but the person who I'm stealing from is having his pleasure automatically diminished.
But that's not been shown to be a question at issue here. The doctrine put forward for logical testing is that I maximise my pleasure. it isn't part of the consideration. It goes to the moral intuition perhaps, but that's not part of the logical question, whether I should be concerned about the detriment to the other person. And that I pursue this avenue of thought, the fact that what I steal can be later stole from me, is a chance, but it isn't a logical inconsistency. The doctrine that I follow, this path, doesn't mean that I will always be maximally satisfied. There is no, or at least there's not the illogic that Stefan tries to portray to that particular selfish line of reasoning.
Right, so I can't just make up a rule for myself, right? Because you're talking about universals here, which means it has to apply to all human beings at all times, under all circumstances. You know, again, minor exceptions. So if I have a theory which says hedonism is the thing, you just go out there, man, and you just satisfy your own wants and desires, and maximizing your own pleasure is the primary goal of life, then it's not universal. Because whatever you do to maximize your own pleasure that diminishes somebody else's pleasure would automatically contradict the moral theory.
No, the moral theorist stated you go out and satisfy yourself. The moral theory didn't say go out and make sure everybody feels great. It said look after yourself as hedonism. So that isn't a contradiction.
Hi there, it's Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. I hope that you're doing well, and I also hope that you're not just listening to the audio cast of this, because we have some visual cues, some not quite special effects, but some visual cues to go over the introduction of some facts into our debate. I know, it's a little bit of a shock. Just breathe, and we'll get through this together. I know that we've been talking a lot about theory, but I hope to be able to show some empirical evidence for the kinds of theories that we've been talking about over the past few podcasts, with particular attention to property rights. Now, as you remember, we talked about if you want to put forward a moral theory.
Right, I'm going to stop there, try and make this just a little over an hour. Essentially what Stefan's going to do is show lots of graphs which show the trend in modernity for increased productivity and wealth by various metrics. And what I'm going to say is he does this under the assumption that this is what the good life is, that this is the moral end, and that's far from clear. But even so, what he's effectively saying, oh, what's this?
Then that moral theory.
I think I'm trying to do a drawing, and it's decided it wants to sync my notebook at this moment. It says it shouldn't take long. With my syncable ones, it shouldn't. Okay. Right. Hope it's not done though. And turn me. Right. Okay. Right, so let's see. Draw. What he's going to say is we have the basic idea of freedom on the graph, and as freedom has gone up, what we have is all these different graphs which show this, yeah, asymptotically exponentially, whatever, growth in whatever, the good life. Even though, but firstly, the input freedom, and this is kind of a market freedom, we have no measure for this, and you know, we've no way of saying whether it did this or anything, yeah, because on the outputs of the graphs, on lots of graphs we get this, and to show the correlation is more than a correlation and an actual causation. You'd have to give an account for why it went down at this particular period in time and say, haha, look, in the USA they retracted this because we've decided that law 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as these laws got passed at these different places in time, we noticed the good life getting better and better, yeah. You know, oh look, they rescinded law 3, yeah, law 3 was crossed out and the good life went down, yeah. But that's, so what we have is nothing more than a superficial correlation between all these supposed good lives and supposed increases in freedom. What's more is the conclusion he's trying to draw you to is that at some point, let's say, we have total freedom, and the implication is, and without doing the work I've just said to show that it's more than correlation, and it is actual causation, you know, you know, and that other factors like the Enlightenment philosophers, you know, who did stress various forms of freedom, but it begs the question whether it is market freedom or, you know, philosophical freedom. Is there a difference? Yeah, and rights and morality and all that. And so what isn't shown and demonstrated is that if this is the case, that at some ultimate point we have market freedom, then we're going to get, you know, an ultimate expansion in the good life. We can't be sure, but since this has never been done, and the evidence of the correlations and the exact reasons for ups and downs, yeah, we can't assume that this is what's going to happen. We can't assume that that there isn't, say we're currently at this position, that there isn't some intermediary sweet point which between the freedoms, yeah, let's call it the sweet point of market freedom, yeah. So you can't rule out that possibility. That would actually yield an even greater good life. And so that's how his evidence falls and fails. I'll just...
It has to be usable product rights.
You should get a few graphs and shoot at the end.
And going from left to right,
yeah.
$100. A society that we, actually to the year 2000,
See
has gone off the chart, of health, 1800. Through, this is a wonderful thing, this automatic light adjustment.
This is largely GDP growth, yeah, you know, wealth of businesses. this comes down to the distributive questions of justice, and you know, whether one ought to I'm not getting into that. This video's gone on long enough. I've been critical enough. Toodaloo.